The Earth Summit was able to understand at one point of time that sustainable development cannot be taken as a one-time decision process. They can either translate the physical and social science knowledge into manageable units of information. Each and every one of us have to understand the importance of sustainability, and if you are not able to understand it, if you are not able to take it forward altogether. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Chapter 8, Unit 2, second semester BBA Sustainable Development, where we are going to speak about the process indicators of sustainable development. You need to understand how indicators will actually make a difference in terms of understanding the decision making for sustainable development. Now, indicators can provide crucial guidance in decision making and in a varieties of ways. So they can either translate the physical and social science knowledge into manageable units of information. At any given point of time, we need to understand that nature gives us the signals in terms of understanding how we need to maintain the balance in the ecosystem. But many a times what we do is that we oversee that signal. We don't try to understand what is actually needed for that hour. So what we tend to do here is that we tend to go ahead, we just tend to understand, measure and calibrate the progress towards sustainable development goals altogether. So that's what is the most important factor here. So when I see this here, they try to make us understand that every decision that is being taken on the basis of environment has to be calibrated, has to be thought clearly as why we are taking this step and what could be the repercussion, what could be the impact of this particular step towards the environment. Now, moving further, they also provide an early warning, sounding in alarm to prevent economic, social and environmental damage. So it's very, very important for all of us to understand here that at any given point of time, if there are going to be any kind of frictions, there are going to be any kind of effect to the system, that can be economic, that can be social, or that can be even environmental damage, we will get some alarm which has to be kept in mind, which has to be triggered so that we are able to save the society and the people. They're also important tools to communicate ideas, thoughts, because the most important thing is that we measure each and every value. We try to understand how this value that has been given, that has been sent as a signal, will definitely help us to understand things better. The 1992 Earth Summit recognized the importance that the role of indicators can play in helping countries making informed decisions about sustainable development. Now, the Earth Summit was able to understand at one point of time that sustainable development cannot be taken as a one-time decision process. There are many times where you will get indicators coming from different walks of the society, different factors, different sides of the environment, which will try to make us understand what is exactly needed, why we need to take this decision, and how we can make this decision fruitful enough. So when we talk about these indicators, we also need to keep in mind that these indicators are being developed in such a manner, are being kept in such a way that the country can protect itself from the destruction path. Now, the other thing is that this recognition is articulated in the Chapter 40 of Agenda 21, which calls on countries at the national level as well as international governmental and non-governmental organizations to develop, identify the indicators for sustainable development that can provide a solid basis for decision making at all levels. So, nevertheless, what I'm trying to see here is that if you can make this indicator a common process, indicator as a national development module altogether, this would be a very, very important factor for most of the nations to understand and follow. Now, this, though it has been made as a chapter in the Agenda 21 that we have been speaking about, many governments still have not taken it very seriously because they are still finding the ways to implement it, the ways to identify it, and to make it even more acceptable. But at the end of the day, as has been spoken by the UN climate change factors or the UNDP, this has to be understood, this has to be made as an important factor of development so that we are able to adapt, adjust, and move with the environment. Followed by the Agenda 21 specifically calls for the harmonization efforts of development sustainable indicators. Why? Because this is something which is a collective effort if I have to talk to you. Now, when I say that this is a collective effort, I mean to say that this is something which has got a lot of understanding that has to go between the nations, that has to go between the people, so that they are able to understand, they're able to take it forward together as a growth process. Many a times it so happens that people forget that this is a collective effort. People only think that this is something that we can do by ourselves, this is something that we can take it by ourselves altogether. But no, this is not by an individual, this is by a country, this is by the entire institution altogether. So each and every one of us have to understand the importance of sustainability. And if you are not able to understand it, if you are not able to take it forward altogether, then this might be a challenge in the coming years for us. So that's why I would definitely say that at any given point of time, we need to make it even more specific. We need to guide people. We need to tell them clearly how this system has to be developed. Followed by the indicators use framework for a communal language. So the language is also a very important point, and a standpoint on question will try to answer this. Now, for example, this simplifies that indicator development chiefly when with several performers are playing their part. Why? Because when I talk about these indicators, it is not that we have to form only one universal language. Probably the indicators will have their own communicative style. They are being spoken in their own language and their own methodology altogether. So now when we start understanding this factor, we also need to see that at any given point of time, the question and its answer are simplified to the local language level, and they have been translated to the mind of the people so that they are able to understand the nature and its impact in the long run. Followed by which the method in which the subjects are outlined also becomes significant in clarification, and most profoundly the studies of these consequences, because the frameworks have assumptions for rationals which have been the indicator that is being founded and must be also made available to willingly to understand these factors. Now, if you see that what has been the factor, what has been the changes that we have been speaking about, is we will be able to make ourselves even more interesting, even more understandable, because some point of time we find that these situations, these indicators might not apply universally. So we have started getting into profound levels of studies where the indicators can be made acceptable at the ground level, specifically to that region, to that country, to that situation, so that they are able to understand, they are able to work according to that parameters. And that's why we say that whatever assumptions that are being taken, whatever ideas that have been taken, they have been localized to that extent where they will be able to see that the development happens in the same level. Followed by the measures of credibility, which is coming into picture. Why this credibility is a very big thing is because one side, when you talk about big projects or activities, the other side you need to see that, will these projects, will they be able to give you something regarding the situations of trust and hope? Because credibility is a very important factor that we are trying to talk about. So when we talk about this legitimacy, when we talk about these factors, so one has to be very clear about these three factors. It should be legal, it should be legitimate, it should have the credibility that yes, it's working, and the main features that are for depicting the effectiveness of the sustainable development indicators. So in which I would always like to say here This is related to the scientific and the technical adequacy of measurement system altogether. So at one point of time, you would be able to see that we are actually trying to build in systems, we are actually trying to build in the process which will help us to overcome all these kind of challenges and make the system even more applicable. So we want to see that every single reasoning that has been brought into it should follow these three footsteps, and it should be effective enough that sustainable development can be made possible in the future. Followed by the measures of credibility. So we have been talking about the measures of credibility in a very, very huge manner. One of them is the indicator that at least guarantees the first two measures. Let's start looking at the resources differ considerably. Yes, so we don't have the same kind of resource for all the countries. Now, between developing and the developed nation, which is of course a very important thing, the socio-economic, environmental, and the knowledge contrast, which is also coming in a big way, which is definitely one of the big challenges that we are talking about by the resource distribution factors. We are also finding ways to cover this resource gap, which is very, very crucial for the equitable representation, both geographically and in terms of identifying the bordering factors. So somewhere down the lane, we are able to see that this has got a lot of things to be played. How the situation is getting worse because some areas the resources are not available. So we see that because of the less distribution of resources, one might not get the equal access in terms of making that particular region credible, and the indicators might not work the same way as it has been working in different countries. Now, the second thing is that the scientific capacity alone is inadequate for the goals for creating reliable, sustainable development. So if you just go by science and technology, if you just go by the rule of the thumb, the formulas, or the ideology, that might not be true for everybody. Why? Because people have to understand it, people have to believe in that. So I think here the challenge is not just from inventions and innovation, but the challenge is making the innovation more acceptable to the people. Second thing is that we need to have that building capacity, we need to have that fundamental things in place, we need to have the resources in place upon which the entire theory can be built. And with that, we will be able to develop a broader access to certify the legitimate, the reason for building up the process altogether. Now, the effective capacity building stresses the main elements of communication, which is very, very important. It also helps in the translation and in the mediation process altogether. So definitely we are able to see that there are some challenges in terms of understanding, adapting, and making the goal even more stipulated altogether. Followed by preparing for sufficient communication between stakeholders is necessary, as it is trying to go and conform with the common understanding of the nature, which is very, very important. And communication is often stuck by misunderstanding, experience differences, beliefs about the basis of convincing discussion. So that is also needs to be taken into account. The mediation is additionally increases the transparency of the process, which is very much needed. And by considering the viewpoints that the laws of behavior, which is coming into picture, the founding criteria for decision-making structure. So at one point of time, it is very essential for all of us to see that we are able to mediate, we are able to build a system that could actually adapt and work according to the environment needs. Now, the framework is that it's the principle on which we are doing it. So Equator's principle, a risk management framework that was adopted by financial institution in order to assess, find out what are the challenges that have been there and the social risk that is there in a project. So it primarily intends to provide a minimum standard, a minimum framework on which the entire decision can be taken, and what is the responsibility that the organization can take in terms of implementing that decision. So what we typically try to do is that we try to put certain benchmarks on which this entire framework can be set, and we take up the project on that. But nevertheless, there are some unseen risk or unseen factors which does not come under the purview of human beings. So there is a possibility that this might happen. In 2014, 80 EP financial institutions in 34 countries officially adopted for the EPs covering the factors of 70% of international project finance, which is very, very important coming. And this was actually taken into a very, very important role of how to go forward, how to do an entire process altogether. Although the EP document does not provide specific indicators as we are talking about, it could be considered as an indicator on its own, which is very, very important today. Why? Because we try to understand, we try to build that entire factor of development. Now, the concept of sustainable development was actually founded as a part of the union system of the economy, where we talk about the social justice and other factors. Now, the recent proposal by the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals opens up a very great opportunity for the implementation of social perspective of sustainable development. So this is definitely going to be a very, very important process altogether. Now, the conclusion we are trying to come here is that effort has definitely been made to make sustainable development as an indicator over the time, but there are times when you start seeing that people tend to overcome it or neglect it, saying that in the name of growth and development, they try to do something different, but not to worry. Why? Because this will actually try to make ourselves even more sustainable in the long run. So definitely this needs to be worked upon, and this will definitely help us to overcome that situation at any given point of time. With that, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that the concept of sustainable development and other factors that have been spoken through this part will be of a great help to you, both theoretically as well as in the practical walk of life. In the next session, we will be covering more about the resources development and the other factors of environmental economics. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.